Welcome to Brainstoryum. I'm Anna Tizard, award-winning dreampunk and deeply weird fantasy author, and yes, that's me and my fiction that's deeply weird. Explore and imagine with me the most unexpected story ideas using the surrealist word game of Exquisite Corpse. Find out more and join in at annatizard.com. This is a storytelling challenge unlike anything you've tried before. Hello, imaginative people. I'm Anna Tizard, and this is episode 70 of Brainstoryum. It's actually the winter solstice today as this releases, which means that no matter how cold and icy and horrible it might get in the coming weeks and months, from now on we are moving towards the light, inching towards the light. Keep that knowledge with you. No matter how grey and miserable it gets, you know we're heading in the right direction. Those not living in the Northern Hemisphere will be like, what's the problem? Well, we're all jealous of you. That's the problem. Now, today's show is indeed the Christmas special. And I've been wondering, how can I make this Christmassy without being too cheesy or chintzy? Spooky toy shops? Rebel elves? Or can I just throw in a sprinkling of snow and have done with it? Hopefully we won't get any picturesque executioners, that unbelievable word combination that came up in the last show. Although I found a way, a non-horror way to develop that one. Thank goodness. But as ever, how can I plan? How can I anticipate? The game of Exquisite Corpse is my doorway into the unknown and the strange magic of the imagination, making connections, hunting stories in the most unlikely places. Stepping out onto this path, all I can do is hold up my mental torch and see where it takes me by being attentive to the whispers of my subconscious mind. Although I could be holding a Christmassy lantern instead of a torch that casts a holly and berry pattern on the ground. But then the shadows may always lengthen and twist into something else. This is probably as far as this metaphor will stretch, so I'll stop there. But will there be Christmas cheer or Christmas chills in the stories that emerge today? Who knows? Because the building blocks of these stories will come from your words, your suggestions, and the whims and wild winds of randomness that blow from the socks of destiny. Oh wait, what am I doing? I'm not ready for the socks yet because I have some amazing ideas to share from listeners who brainstorm stories from a phrase in the last show. 2 phrases actually, because I was a bit unsure which one to suggest. I had one reply on the enchanting creative, and the others responded to the wisp-like ship. Nina said, the enchanting creative, as she liked to call him, turned out to be an absolute fiasco. He had neither charm nor originality, and his marketing strategy consisted in cold calling random clients, offering discounts on dusty old spells and trinkets, rather than developing some alternative or novel approach focused on selling our most innovative magical devices. She was not convinced at all. I like this. I never thought of a wizard as being part of an R&D department or some kind of salesperson, but if you combine the real world with magic, I guess that could happen. Is this an enemies to friends story or something more? Thank you for your idea, Nina. Mariah thought that the wisp-like ship would be a ship that becomes invisible, perhaps a warship with a cloaking device, using magic or turning into a submarine. Or it always appears and disappears in fog, as if it has its own fog machine. just because the captain likes special effects. That would be a fascinating wisp-like ship with so many different forms and powers. Thank you for sharing your ideas, Mariah. Nick Vrakar said, the starship Pathfinder had been missing for years, and there it was, aimlessly floating in the void of space. Captain Avery didn't know what happened to the vessel. It was in pieces, held together in wisp-like threads of remaining steel and cable. He hoped the bridge was intact. Ooh, I like that. I don't know why I hadn't thought of a spaceship in this context. Thank you, Nick. Elena Dennison said, I saw this ad in the travel section of a newspaper the other day. The wisp-like ship will depart from Portree of Skye on New Year's Eve, a minute before midnight on the dot. Destination unknown. Places are available to those with unfulfilled dreams and broken hearts. Any inquiries in person on the day. You are advised to pack light but warm. Love it. There's a poetic ring to all of this. I want to see where the ship goes. To a place where dreams are fulfilled? Thank you, Elena. It's all feeling quite magical already. I think it's time to lift our proverbial lanterns and see what twisting paths lie ahead. As for being Christmassy, playing games, having fun, making up stories, if that's not Christmassy, you might say this show is Christmassy all year long. Okay, and for those who haven't listened before, Exquisite Corpse mixes words and phrases from different players into a sentence that goes describing word noun, action, describing word noun. And generally these sentences are very weird indeed. But somehow I managed to come up with stories from them. So our first word, a describing word, is from Mariah. Coral. So being as a describing word, I'd have to assume that would be the colour coral. Quite an unusual colour. Our noun is from Sean, also known as Blue Wizard Facts. Milkman. A coral milkman? Somewhat lurid, a shade of milkman. What kind of milkman is this? I'm going to withhold judgment and keep going. The action is from Sophie de Soles. Entered the cave with. Oh, this is a milkman on an unusual mission. I don't think he's just delivering the milk today. So let's see. Oh, God. Right. The next word is from Anonymous. Wilted. Who or what was wilted? It kind of sounds like a flower, but I suppose at a stretch a person might be said to look wilted. If they're exhausted, just has that kind of droopiness going on in my mind. Okay, so the final word is from Alessandro Bozzo. Oh my God. Squirrel. Okay, so I'm going to read the entire Exquisite Corpse, and I promise you some sense will come from this. The coral milkman entered the cave with the wilted squirrel. Oh, the wilted squirrel, it sounds like it's been on a very long and difficult journey. Nuts are hard to come by in this wintry forest. So there is a wintry theme at least. Might not quite get Christmassy with this, but the coral, the coral. milkman. I mean, so yeah, as I was saying, if you use coral as a describing word or adjective, it would probably have to mean the colour of the milkman's uniform or something to do with the logo on his jacket, although that would still be quite an unusual colour, sort of this orangey colour. So often companies use blue, don't they? Unless, of course, he's a white guy with a bad spray tan. It happens. Now, that's more interesting because it shows he is actively resisting winter by aspiring to have a tan and pretend he's somewhere hot. So we have we have a wilted, half-starved squirrel, perhaps, and a spray-tanned milkman. But what is this cave they enter together? Because the coral milkman entered the cave with the wilted squirrel. I'm trying to picture these characters, and I'm wondering if this is a case of shapeshifting done badly. 2 cases of shapeshifting done badly. But I think I'm going to need some green tea first. And then maybe I can decide. Okay. Right then. The coral milkman entered the cave with the wilted squirrel, but in a Christmassy fashion. Let me use the pause button and see what happens when I start to write. Suburbia, a place of pretences, closed doors, false smiles, the little wave from behind the net curtain. He'd been spying on this area for a few days, but he knew now that it was perfect. Under his milkman uniform, his tentacles writhed with anticipation. He managed to keep his expression bland as his milk float hummed past the Michaels, the Sanders, and the Shahs, their Christmas wreaths out already. But his face flushed coral with excitement. He breathed deeply into these borrowed lungs and tried to focus on his humanness. He didn't quite fit into this human body, but he wouldn't need it much longer. As he steered the milk float around the curve of the crescent, ready to park it, he threw a pitying glance at the plastic bag next to him. What was left of the real milkman would have some adjusting to do when this superior being gave him back his body. It was a necessary but messy task. Everything had to be put back, more or less, the way it had been, before an alien life form had entered the small, quiet lives of these people. All traces would be safely removed. He sneered as he cut the engine and climbed out, shoes soft on the pavement. Humans were so good at finding an excuse for everything. 3 days inside a plastic bag, not to mention the flickers of memory he would likely retain from the alien's experiences in it, particularly this morning's, would all be put down to a dream. No effort needed. Pretense was something people could be trusted to take care of on their own. Past the Joneses, his shoes crunched the gravel alongside their house. His milkman disguise was a good choice for someone wandering around the streets this early in the morning, but it would be better not to wake anyone. Glancing from side to side, he let his tentacles slip down through his trousers onto the ground, and the tips of them gently pushed him up, caressing the little stones, so much more subtle than these clumsy legs and feet. Confident he wasn't being watched, he glided an inch or so off the ground for the short distance to the alleyway. The fence between the gardens was easy enough to swing over without bothering to touch the ground again, and moments later he was in the woods. The trees rustled as if wishing to part for him, though no breeze blew. He knew without looking where the twigs shivered and recoiled from this unnatural creature that strode into their midst. The woods were ideal for this. Like the smell of rotting dropped leaves, this secluded, thickly forested area was heavy with the atmosphere of well-kept secrets. Things humans would never understand, though they were of the same world and lived side by side with these oxygen producers. These quiet, sky-reaching beings would not betray the aliens' purpose to any of the silly-headed neighbours on the other side of that fence. Humans were artists of self-made distraction. Past the brambles, which tore at the milkman's uniform until the ragged disguise could only be destined for the trash. A gap opened between the trees, and he found it. A doorway in the air. A doorway of doorways. The entry point for aliens to invade Britain. A movement to the milkman's left jerked his head, a needle-sharp scampering around the edge of the tree. Uncertain, the milkman's tentacles squirmed beneath his clothing, ready to break through what was left of his ripped uniform to strike, when the squirrel poked its head around the side of the tree and said, "Oi." "Oh," said the milkman, "it's you. This was the best you could do?" The squirrel, still clinging to the side of the tree trunk, managed an awkward shrug. "It seemed practical. I've been stuck out here for 3 days, don't forget, waiting for you to pick your moment. I haven't needed much to eat thanks to my size, and this lot have bird feeders." He twitched his tiny head towards the neighbouring gardens. The only inconvenience was those ruddy dogs on their walks. The milkman raised his eyebrows. "You're picking up the lingo nicely for a woodland creature that squeaks and whose brain has a language centre the size of one of your precious seeds." The squirrel skittered around the bough and stared back with beady black eyes. "Well, that would be on account of Mrs. at number 9. I borrowed her for a bit. Lot of crosswords and daytime TV." He gave a small shudder, which made his loose furred skin quiver. "This body's a bit ill-fitting, though. Probably too much shape-shifting for 1 week." At this, the milkman sighed, longing for a good stretch, which was thoroughly impossible in his current form. "You're not the only bad fit around here. I hope you put this missus back in the same form that you found her?" "Oh, yeah, she's fine." The squirrel glanced at the base of the tree with a thoughtful tilt of his head. The milkman tutted, the customary carelessness he had to tolerate in his colleague, and looked pointedly at their shared destination. The anomaly wavered before them, soft as a bubble. Beyond the dull stripes of trees around it, a hint of the dark walls of the cave beyond shone wetly. "It's time to do what we came here to do." And so it was that the coral milkman entered the cave with the wilted squirrel. So I did it. Ooh, aliens at Christmas? Shape-shifting into milkmen and squirrels? It's a creepy flavour, I admit. The beginning of something. Apocalyptic, maybe. Well, let's see if the socks of destiny have anything else to tell us about the jolly time of Christmas. Okay, so our first new word is from Paul Thomas. Morose. So sort of sullen and bad-tempered, moody. Next word, let's find out who is morose. This is from Alessandro Bozzo. Fashionista or fashionista. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce that. Why would a fashionista be morose? Let's see what they did, if I can get this out from between my fingers. This is from Mariah. Spied on. Ooh, spying on someone when you're morose. Why would you do that? Next word is from Alessandro Bozzo again. Friendly. Normally expect to spy on someone who's up to no good, but this is someone who's friendly. So the final word is from Paul Benfield. Laptop. A friendly laptop. Let's see. So the entire Exquisite Corpse is the morose fashionista spied on the friendly laptop. This makes me think of shoulder surfing. Actually, this is a phrase which mystified me when I first came across it. And just to complicate matters, I have to tell you, I know a local tomcat, black and white, long hair, extremely friendly, so friendly that practically the whole street knows him. He shoulder surfs, literally. If you stand near him, he will climb you and purr in your ear. We call him Tufty Cheeks because he has tufty cheeks. He's brilliant. I love him. I just worry he's a bit too trusting. But what can you do? But stand there and allow him to climb you. And don't go out in tights, ladies. But the phrase, going back to the Exquisite Corpse, a little bit of a distraction there. The phrase shoulder surfing normally means not someone climbing onto your shoulder, but looking over your shoulder at your laptop or phone screen. And the implied security risks around this, if you happen to be working or using a password, something like that. So if a morose fashionista spied on a friendly laptop, this sounds to me like shoulder surfing, the traditional use of the phrase. Is she looking for ideas that she can steal for an upcoming fashion show? And she's morose because she's got stuck. She can't come up with the ideas, the designs that she needs for the show, and she's got a deadline. And that's why she's spying on a competitor's laptop, maybe. Another fashion designer, someone whose clothes will also be catwalked on the same show. Now, I'm not into fashion at all, but as a fantasy writer and imagination yogi, I will hunt for ideas which spark off my imagination, no matter where they are, in places where I don't necessarily feel confident. It strikes me that fashion, when you get to those high fashion shows, fashion thinks of itself as a kind of art form that pushes the boundaries. And I'm sure I'm not alone in finding some high fashion rather silly and unwearable. Did I just say that? Always pushing to further extremes. Weren't there some dresses made from meat at one stage? You see models wearing all sorts of bizarre structures. I wouldn't necessarily call them clothes if clothes are meant to be comfortable things that prevent you from being naked or cold. Let's face it. So I can be inventive with this. I don't have to like high fashion to play with it. So this fashionista is having a crisis which she daren't let her competitors or her employees know about. She needs inspiration fast, but it's just not coming. And she's never heard of the game of Exquisite Corpse, so she can't use that for brainstorming either. Such a shame. Otherwise, she might do something with the picturesque executioner, though I'm not sure anyone really wants to see that at a fashion show. Let me try the pause button. Circle hurried along the platform. Her real name was Sandra, but she changed it to Circle for aesthetics and branding. She hadn't meant to follow Dagmaria, certainly not in such a drab raincoat as this. Her favourite disguise when shopping, especially in the lead up to Christmas. Glitter, sparkles, the pine fragrance of big fir trees. Christmas chintz was a forbidden weakness of hers, an obsession she kept to herself in the world of high fashion. But while browsing rustic handmade tree decorations, Circle's eyes had fixed on the back of her arch enemy's head as he sauntered out of the department store, and her legs sort of took over from there. It was his man bag that caught her breath. The latest design, fluffy around the edges, but otherwise smooth and flat, clearly carrying a thin, firm weight. Could it be his laptop? Why would he take it out with him if he wasn't expecting to use it while he was out? Circle could not let this opportunity go. She tottered after him, hoping that the clop of her heels on the pavement would mingle with the general rabble of the street. 4 weeks until the Yuletide fashion show, and she still hadn't got a single sketch worth sharing with her team. Not a stitch had been made. No fabric had been ordered, and this time of year, that alone would be tricky. She had to create a killer collection, something that would make her audience gasp. But what? If she could just have a peek at what the other fashion designers had planned, then she would know what to do to stand out from the crowd. And so it was that Circle trotted after Dagmaria, always keeping a person or two between them. The brim of her hat angled over her face. Stylish, but probably a mistake with this raincoat. Until she found herself at the train station, beeping her purse at the barrier with no idea where she was following him to. Except to success, she told herself. Her heart pounding, she hopped onto the train after the flap of Dagmaria's coat just as the doors were sliding shut. She stood waiting to see where he would sit, all her nerves tingling, while pretending to take a deep interest in a security notice next to the door. What to do in an emergency evacuation? Press the emergency button. But Circle had other buttons she wanted to press, and they were all on Dagmaria's keyboard. Where could she sit without giving herself away? She held her breath as he settled into a seat by a window, which had an empty chair directly behind it. Bingo! Circle rushed over and slipped in, peering between the headrests of the 2 seats in front. But if anyone saw her looking, it would be too obvious. And besides, there wasn't enough space to see. She slumped back in her chair, defeated. Then her back pinged up straight, the reflection in the window. It was dark enough outside and light enough inside the train for the glow of Dagmaria's screen to cast its rectangle of white light against the window. Holding her breath so she didn't steam up the glass, Circle shoved her hat aside and snuggled her head against the cold window, hoping no one was watching. At first, all she saw was whiteness covered in streams of text, too tiny and blurred to make out. "Not your emails," she silently urged him. She urged the universe. "Obsess over your designs. It's what you were born to do." After an agonising few minutes of scrolling over his inbox, Dagmaria's fingers tapped over the keys and a new image sprang into view. His head bumped against the headrest in what Circle deemed to be smug satisfaction. Meanwhile, she pressed her head against the window to see better, not caring that the glass was damp with condensation. His sketches, followed by colour images, probably AI generated. He never was much of a visual artist. Circle sneered, grinning greedily to herself. Then the shock as her eyes began to make sense of what she saw. Dagmaria was embracing the digital world more utterly than she could have predicted. The images were of models wearing computer screens? Laptops? Dresses that were like giant cables, the model's head seeming to burst through the top of them, where broken wires sprouted out in all directions. What was this madness? As Circle pored over these images reflected in the window, transfixed, it dawned on her, reluctantly, the little seed of genius which Doug Maria had plucked from the depths of his weird brain. This fashion, if you could call it that, was not about wearing, it was about being. Fashion, as the ultimate expression of the inner self, was less about wearing designs and ideas than becoming an expression of your own ideas, a sentiment shared by many a designer. But this looked like the merging of the digital with the soul. Wasn't that a phrase he'd used in an interview when he'd been accused of using too much AI? Well, this was his answer, his vision of the future of humankind, people merging with technology, literally. Except that those metal frames sticking out of that blouse or whatever it was supposed to be looked decidedly uncomfortable. Circle smothered an urge to laugh and let out a snort. It was all too serious. Circle blinked twice, recovering from her giggles. That was the key. That was her way in to undercutting Doug Maria's grandiose statement about technology and the future. What people needed right now was to feel elevated above the banality of tech as they closed their laptops and shut down work ready for the Christmas holidays. A bit of escapism, something to transport them away from it all, not some doom-laden message about the death of human creativity. What she needed was whimsy, light-heartedness. It was Christmas, for goodness sake. Why shouldn't people have some fun? Why shouldn't people be fun? Christmas trees. She snapped her fingers, then dived down to rummage in her shopping bag in case she'd drawn attention. With her chin still pressed against her knees, waiting for the danger to pass, Circle's face lit up in a secret grin. She would dress her models as Christmas trees. Baubles would light from their bodies like warm, pulsing hearts of colour. As they swaggered to the end of the catwalk and gave their customary turn, little sweeps of fir tree branches would shudder from their torsos, jingling with tiny bells. At first, the audience would laugh, but then they would see what she had done. While the other designers were busy trying to bash the audience over the head with highbrow concepts, which were frankly quite depressing, Circle would bring laughter and Christmas cheer to them all. And maybe she could bring in some low-fat mince pies for those poor skinny models backstage. Well, that was unexpected. A little cheesy. It's Christmas. It happens. And so the morose fashionista spied on the friendly laptop. Not sure if it was a friendly laptop, but I think I managed to get the rest to work. Now, while I was editing my first draft of this fairly ridiculous story, one thing I decided to do was to go back and drop a hint in the beginning of what was to come. It was in retrospect that I did this and gave Circle a secret obsession with Christmas from the start. Otherwise, I realised the idea of dressing up models as Christmas trees would seem to come rather out of the blue. It did come out of the blue for me as I was writing it. That's part of the magic of discovery writing, where ideas will just creep up on you, full of surprises. But to round this off as a short story, with the reader in mind, it made sense that this idea in some way fulfilled a secret desire which Circle harboured from the beginning. And I've just realised it's about Circle and it's kind of cyclical. But all stories, I mean the best stories, are a little bit cyclical, so It's not unique in that way. I also decided to make her more likable because she actually started out in my mind as slightly evil. And the reason for making this change is that there aren't any other characters that we really spend time with in this short story. There's no one that we can root for besides her. But if you wanted to explore this kind of story and develop it into something a bit longer, you could make Circle, or whoever your fashionista character is, you could make them evil. And that would be an entirely different tale. Something to think about? Let's see what else the Socks of Destiny have in store for us. Is it going to get creepy again? I have a feeling. Okay, our first word is from Robin the Mail Lady. Moist. People do not like that word. This is what I hear. But what will I do with it? Okay, so what? Oops, I've dropped it now. This piece of paper is leaping out of the Socks of Destiny. What or who is so desperate to be moist? This is from Chris Machel. Welcome to the game, Chris. Oh my goodness. Chimera. Okay, so you might not know what this is. I didn't, so I've scribbled all around the edges of the word. It's actually, there are two meanings. The main one being from Greek mythology. A chimera is a fire-breathing female monster with a lion's head, goat's body, and serpent's tail. It can also be a thing which is hoped for, but which is illusory or impossible to achieve. And now just reading that out, I think, how strange, because they feel like opposite meanings. Because how could a fire-breathing monster have anything to do with something that you would hope for? I mean, it's illusory or impossible, unless you believe in myths, but there's probably a story in it somewhere. Anyway, we have a moist chimera, which is possibly the weirdest combination I think we've ever had on the show. I don't know. Get in touch if you think that may be wrong and you can think of another more crazy one. So the next word or phrase, because this is an action part, is from Mariah again. Danced around. Dancing moist chimera. Okay. So our next word, I'm just going to keep going and we won't judge until we reach the end. This is from Chris Machel again. It's another weird word. Centrifugal. Again, I had to look this up. I do like my listeners to stretch me sometimes. It literally means moving or tending to move away from a centre. And in fact, I seem to remember when I was looking, I think I was using an online dictionary and there was something in there about the word fugitive. So the fugal bit has the same root as the fugal and fugitive have the same root as each other. And it literally means to flee. So centrifugal means fleeing from the centre. I'm not sure that really makes any difference, but it just struck me as interesting. I like the origins of words sometimes. It helps them stick, I think. Okay, so the final word is from Wendy. I'm almost frightened to look. Tomato plant. The centrifugal tomato plant. Now that is the most mind-blowing word combination since the moist chimera came into our lives. Let's face it. Maybe the Christmas centrifugal tomato plant, eh? Did you think about that? I'm trying to imagine this and it feels alien. I am haunted by aliens in this show. What is going on? So the moist chimera danced around the centrifugal tomato plant. At least dancing around something makes sense for something that is fleeing a centre, going around it. Okay, so I'm just going to think about tomato plants first. What do I know about tomato plants? They have a particular smell. It's almost smoky. I think that might be because they actually contain nicotine. Small amounts. I'm not sure that it's bad for you in such tiny amounts, but it is a weird fact. My mum used to grow them in her front garden, which is south facing and gets scorching hot, but they love it. They lap up the heat. But can they be centrifugal? What centre is this plant fleeing? Although a tomato plant might not be an organic plant, it might be a manufacturing plant that processes tomatoes into ketchup, passata, tomato soup. In this context, centrifugal sounds kind of messy in a factory, some kind of breakdown or malfunction of machinery that causes many tomatoes to flee the centre at high speeds. Okay, but what about the moist chimera? I think I have to face this word combination. I'm thinking this could be some seriously hot cocktail. So if a drink could have the flavour equivalent of a fire-breathing monster, maybe there's a bit of chili in there. And if we're going to follow through, moving down through the monster, if we're going to use this metaphor, you have a goat's body next. Well, maybe let's skip that part. I don't even want to think about putting feta cheese in this thing. But maybe that's the bite, because goats will apparently eat almost anything. Or the balance of flavour, because goats have the most unbelievable balance. And a serpent's tail at the end. Is that not quite a kick, but a lashing? Maybe something that unbalances you. It's a strong drink. I think I need to press pause and dive in, see where this takes me. You can't call it a wet chimera. If anything, it has to be the moist chimera. Sasha glared at her co-worker, Julian, who pulled a face in return. Sasha, people are grossed out by the word moist. How can you not know that? Yeah, but that's what makes it eye-catching. It grabs people's attention. And by the way, wet is way worse. That's like, you know it's something disgusting. She'd already drawn a sketch. Julian had to admit it looked pretty good, if somewhat bizarre. She'd even drawn a Christmas hat on top of the lion's head. This would be incongruous if the mythical monster wasn't already a mishmash of clashing parts, lion, goat and serpent. Julian sighed. I give up. Oh, please, Christmas shoppers, come and enjoy our gross new drink. You know you'll hate it, he murmured with a weary, sarcastic joy. It was less than an hour before the restaurant pub opened, and not really the time to be inventing dodgy new cocktails. Their manager, who had sprained her ankle by falling off a ladder during a mad rush to put up Christmas decorations, was still liable to ring either of them and demand to see their festive display through video messaging. Neither of them wanted to be the one to tell her that the lavish Christmas tree she'd ordered still hadn't arrived, and the delivery company were now ignoring their calls. There was nowhere within walking distance that sold trees, and they doubted she would allow the extra budget for another one, despite what they called her tinsel mania, or on bad days, her bauble ballistics. She loved Christmas. Sasha said, probably for the 5th time that morning, "There's always my tomato plant." "That thing's been sprouting like Day of the Triffids on the balcony for a decade." Sasha glared. "I haven't worked here for a decade, so no, it hasn't." 10 minutes later, she was staggering down the stairs, clutching a giant green spidery thing that seemed to be clutching her back. "Stop staring at it like that," she said, setting it down next to the bar. "It's pretty. Look." She cupped one of the tomatoes, which was impressively huge and shiny. "It even has natural baubles." Julian gulped and swallowed down the urge to laugh. Sasha carried on as if encouraged. "You know, a bit of tinsel here and there. If anything, it's a refreshing original twist on the Christmas tree. It's still red and green, Christmas colours. People will be impressed that we put so much thought into it. Besides, no tree was cut down for this." "You can get potted trees, you know." "Yes, and you know as well as I do they have so little root left on them they never survive beyond March. Now help me hook these branches around those picture frames so we can spread it out a bit, make it look bigger." Branches? But Julian obliged without correcting her, standing astride the pot in the most awkward position, trying to ignore the dull ache in his heart. In some ways, Sasha reminded him so much of his twin sister. Wacky, outspoken, bonkers. Now on a different continent and not coming home for Christmas. Jess always accused Julian of being the sensible one, which he was fine with. It was a long-standing joke between them that they were yin and yang, opposites that nonetheless made sense together. Jess with her UFO obsession and paranormal fan club. Julian doing business studies whenever he wasn't working late and learning how to run a pub. Since he'd broken up with his girlfriend, he could have done with a shoulder to cry on. Jess was the only person he could really open up to. The last thing Jess had said on the phone was, "I'll find a way to come and see you. Twin thing, you know?" The waiting staff arrived. Julian got behind the bar. The doors opened and the day rumbled on. It was quieter than usual, though. Perhaps people were so focused on their Christmas shopping that they didn't want to stop to eat. Or they were buying coffee and caramelised nuts from the stand outside instead. The sickly sweet smell kept floating in whenever the doors bumped open. But there were times he was unsure where that scent was coming from. Sasha had insisted on putting the bowl of her dodgy cocktail right next to the tomato plant. While she'd provided a ladle for people to scoop it into a small glass, Julian was sure that there'd been some spillage, although some of this would have been caught by the pot plant underneath. At least her ludicrous plant had some use after all, less mopping up for them all to do. It was during the lull in the mid-afternoon when Julian noticed a spark in the side of his vision. He blinked, rubbed his eyelid with his sleeve and glanced away from the glasses he was cleaning. There it was again. Only this time he saw what it really was. Like an overgrown bauble floating over the bar was a giant tomato. Spinning, the fairy lights slipped liquid silver over its swollen form. Julian stood, stricken and unable to look away. It was impossible. It was like something his twin sister would dream up after a few beers. Not moving, he called out, "Sasha," hoping she'd hear him through the hatch into the kitchen. "What did you put in that cocktail?" She huffed loudly enough for him to hear. "That's the point of a secret recipe. It's meant to be secret." "Julian, whispered a voice, so familiar he almost dropped his glass. Is that really you? It's Jess. A face appeared in the blur that was the floating tomato. What? Jess? Julian murmured. Look at me, she said. I'm a UFO. Okay, I think I need to stop there. Is this too bonkers? Maybe. But more importantly, where is it going? This is the point in a story where my discovery writing method kind of draws to an end and I have to stop and consider my options. The main question I have is around cause and effect. For no plot can really evolve without understanding this. Everything has a reason, whether it's psychological or physical, usually a bit of both. What has Julian's twin, Jess, done to be able to appear like this? Or is this something you might want to change? These are perfectly legitimate questions to ask yourself. Also, is the moist chimera cocktail, which has caused the tomato to break free like a miniature UFO, or is it that the tomato plant was already a bit dodgy? I do like that word dodgy. It's come up quite a lot with this story. I think the cocktail would have to be a trigger at least. But therefore, what does that mean for all the people who have drunk it? The bigger picture of the story opens up when you ask, what happens next to all these people who've gone back to their shopping or have gone home or to other pubs and restaurants? And what about Sasha, who might have drunk more of it than anyone else? So it's not just, you could shift the whole purpose or focus of the story away from the tomatoes, even if it was a centrifugal tomato plant that originally inspired this idea. It doesn't have to end up being about that. I'm really not quite sure what the centrifugal part is, though. What is this centre from which the plant flees? Or is the centre the tomato itself from which the rest of the plant withdraws? Or maybe there's another centre in the centre of town, like a black hole which is about to suck everything up. A break in the sky, a gaping hole like a maw, a tear in the atmosphere. Questions, so many questions. And this is probably both the most difficult part of this stage in writing a story, but it can also be the most fun and the most inventive. This is what practicing imagining is all about for authors, and how much you are prepared to explore and question and test out different potential ideas will really influence how much you can wow your reader, especially if you're writing for an audience who like a bit of weird, like me. Now, finally, before I go, I'm letting you know I'm going to try something a bit different, a bit of an experiment. I've decided to release a mini ebook combining abridged transcriptions of both this show and the last one, number 69, as a sort of sample, mainly because there's so much material packed into these shows and not everyone is into podcasts. So this will be a way to reach a wider audience who just like to read. I'll include the introduction, then jump straight into my brainstorms and stories and any writing tips I give. So it will lack some material. It will lack the lovely material from my contributors and won't include any tea drinking or any of the anticipation you feel as I pull out words from the Socks of Destiny. But I just think that will make more sense as a thing that you read. But also, very few of the platforms provide decent transcriptions anyway. And I like the idea of pulling together a bundle of stories and brainstorms, repackaging them into a downloadable ebook as something you can keep and return to even if you've listened today. I'm going to put it on Etsy to begin with and see what happens, because Etsy is a lovely platform full of crafts, art and gifts, but you can also buy ebooks and books on there. If you are subscribed to my private email list, I will offer you a free copy very shortly, and I might do a limited freebie on X and Blue Sky in the lead up to Christmas as well. But if you feel like you would like to support me, and this is one way of doing it, giving me a little tip, that would be amazing. Or a big way you can help support me is to tell others about the show. I'm really just trying to expand the reach of Brainstoryum and enhance your experience of the show if you might also like to enjoy it in another format to read. So find me on etsy.com, or even better, subscribe to my private email list at annatizard.com to get your ebook for free, packed with stories and Christmas cheer and Christmas weirdness. Well, I hope you've enjoyed the show, and it only remains for me to say have a wonderful, restful Christmas break and go forth and be inspired. I hope you enjoyed today's Brainstoryum. You can find out more about Exquisite Corpse and my series, The Book of Exquisite Corpse, at annatizard.com. Subscribe to my e-newsletter and you'll get Volume 1 for free. And while you're there, why not submit a few words to the Socks of Destiny on my play page? You may inspire me or inspire yourself to write a unique new story. See you next time.